Hello Americans, welcome to our channel. This video is made by free videos from Storyblocks, and these images in video we use just for explanation, and it's free use also.
Boy hands guard a note. Immediately sounds the alarm when he reads it. Great panic arose at a large museum yesterday morning when alarms went off all throughout the building. The person initiating this bizarre chain of events was a local boy who initially seemed harmless to bystanders. But things got heated when the small child presented a uniformed guard with this mysterious note. The guard, who because of the note set off a museum-wide alarm, later stated that this was the most frightening day of his life. It didn't help that the museum was packed full of guests who were just having a carefree cultural day, but they were in for a nerve-wracking experience. The guard in question, who everyone later would come to know as George Mollard, looked out over a crowd in the main hallway when it all started. The place was loud with voices, but everyone abided by the rules and kept their distance, except for one little boy who suddenly approached George. George was on strict orders to keep guests 5 feet away from the art and himself during his shift. But what harm could a little boy do? Well, he quickly had to take back those thoughts, because when the kid arrived at his feet and presented George with a note, his eyes quickly widened. "Where are your parents, little boy?" the uniformed guard asked. But the child did not answer and simply pressed the note he held in his hand firmly into George's hand. A frown appeared on the guard's face as he opened his hand and unfolded the note inside. And then things happened quickly. George read the note intently and quickly felt a rush of panic shoot through his body. "What the hell?" he uttered softly to himself before folding the paper back up. He looked up again and tried to make eye contact with the boy, who suddenly seemed to have disappeared into thin air. The normally calm and collective museum guard tried to keep his cool so he wouldn't cause a major panic. But as his eyes darted across the crowd of people without being able to spot the child, he realized that he had no choice. He had to do something he really did not want to do. Without further hesitation, he grabbed his portable radio to signal his colleagues. "We have a code red. I repeat, we have a code red. This is not a drill," he said as he moved toward the nearest fire alarm. The moment he pulled it, the visitors started to run and scream, and panic filled the building. George had expected this would happen, but it was the opposite of what was needed. He took charge of the situation and instructed his colleagues to guide everyone out. "Tell them it's a fire drill. Try to calm everyone down," he told them. Eventually, people started to calm down, but this was just the beginning. With swift help from his colleagues, George managed to clear the main hall. Guests formed orderly lines and exited the museum under the false pretense of a fire drill. But now an even more important task arose. The boy needed to be found, and the seriousness of the note needed to be verified. George started looking where he had last seen the boy, his guard post. George ran past the last few exiting people, trying to catch a glimpse of the young boy anywhere. He asked his colleagues about it. Someone had to have seen him, right? But it all seemed futile. Until one of his colleagues mentioned seeing a boy walking in the opposite direction of the exit. He ran toward the stairs. "I couldn't stop him, and he suddenly disappeared," he said. That sounded familiar, George thought. The worried guard hurried toward the staircase and started yelling, hoping the boy would respond. George's chanting echoed through the staircase and initially provided no response. The museum was emptied out. Maybe the child left with the panicked guests. But right before George turned around and left the concrete corridor, he heard a soft, high-pitched voice. "I'm here," it said. George hurried up the stairs in the direction of the voice and eventually found the kid on the 3rd floor. The boy sat on the staircase with his head between his legs, looking very scared and overwhelmed by the situation. George knelt beside the young boy and immediately asked him about the note. "How did you get this note? It's clearly the handwriting of an adult." His tone was gentle, but it also had a clear note of urgency because the message in the paper was very dire and needed to be resolved quickly if true. The boy's face was pale when he looked up at George. George showed the note again, and the boy sniffled, but then he said something useful. He explained to George that he got the note from his parents who had told him to get it to a guard. "But I don't understand what is happening, and now I lost my parents," the boy cried. George's concern grew. If his parents were behind this and simply used their son as a messenger, the message's validity became much more serious. This proved that it wasn't just an innocent childish joke anymore. George used his walkie-talkie to alert his colleagues immediately and grabbed the boy's hand to search for his suspicious parents. "I will help you find your parents," he said reassuringly, trying to make the boy feel as comfortable as possible with his presence. George needed the boy's full cooperation because the museum was massive and his parents could have been hiding anywhere. "Where did you last see them?" George asked. A slight smile appeared on the boy's face when George promised to help him find his parents. The guard followed the boy up the stairs, but the further they ventured, the more George's nerves began to creep up on him. They cleared multiple rooms, and every time, they found no trace of the two individuals. George needed answers from the boy's parents, or else there would be no stopping this massive disaster. But then a devastating message arrived through his walkie-talkie. "The building is empty, sir." This seemed like a positive thing. But if the building was indeed empty, then it meant that the boy's parents had escaped his grasp. George walked through the empty building, entering a dark corridor. The guard's mind was racing, contemplating what to do. Now that the building had been cleared without finding this kid's parents, the only thing George could do was ensure the boy's safety. "We need to get out of the building fast," George explained. But then, a sudden voice emerged from the darkness in the corridor. "Did we hear that correctly? Is everyone gone? Can we talk freely?" It sounded. George was startled and looked confused, trying to pierce the darkness. Who did these voices belong to? His question was answered when the people suddenly appeared. George's mind was working overdrive, but excited shouts suddenly interrupted his thoughts. "Mom! Dad!" The boy yelled as he ran over to them. The guard immediately shifted gears. "Are you the parents?" he asked to be sure. When they nodded, George felt relieved but also nervous because this encounter could quickly become dangerous. As expected, the relief part was short-lived and tension instantly mounted as the boy's parents needed to provide answers if they didn't want to be arrested on the spot. George pulled out the note. "What is the meaning of this? How do you know what is going on?" he demanded. His gentle tone was gone. The parents looked at each other for a moment, their faces showing nerves and concern. "We're sorry for all the secrecy, but this was the only way we could think it would work," the father said. George shook his head in frustration. "No more riddles, give me the answers that I want. Now," he shouted. The parents were startled by George's aggressive tone, but it did its job as they explained why they handled the situation so secretly. Their first priority was to get everyone to safety, which they succeeded in because Louis, their son, could warn the guards. He was the only one that could do that, the mother said. They wanted to raise awareness of the situation without causing panic or suspicion, so they used their son. "We would not have been able to get close enough to any of the guards to hand over a note discreetly," the father explained. "But Louis was able to," the mother added. The more the parents talked, the more confused George became. But he had to give them some credit, as he would have certainly stopped a grown-up from getting close, and he had let Louis walk right up to him. But he wanted to know what was happening and why they had written the note. George looked at the note and read it aloud. "Evacuate the building now. There's a serious threat. Everyone is in danger." The guard was trained to take something like this seriously and immediately acted on it. But now he wanted to know what was going on so he could try to resolve the situation. "Explain." The parents shared a nervous look and shuffled around. "There's no time to explain. We have to hurry. We can show it to you," they pleaded. But George didn't waver. He had been patient enough. "We aren't moving from this spot until I hear what I want," he said demandingly. It was apparent the parents didn't expect this reaction. They shortly pleaded for George to let them show him, but they realized their attempts were futile and that the only option to move from this spot was to tell George everything. So they started from the start, and the guard couldn't believe what he heard. The parents explained they visited today to enjoy the beautiful building and learn about its history like any other tourist. However, as they walked through the corridors, they eventually saw someone very suspicious. He was busy at one of the cabinets, but he didn't look like an employee, the father said. The parents looked at George as if this explanation was enough. "Someone left something inside the building. Don't you understand? You have to come with us now and see for yourself," the mother yelled, panicked. The guards slowly realized where this could be going and understood why the parents were in such a hurry. George gestured for the parents to start moving. Meanwhile, they continued talking. When we looked inside the cabinet, we realized everyone was in danger. We had to do something even if it meant we would be the main suspect or let the culprit escape. The guard urged them on as he became increasingly worried. The parents started to run through the empty corridors, and George followed. His mind was filled with the different possible contents of that cabinet, and he didn't like any of them. Eventually, they stopped. "This is it," the mother said as she pointed to the furniture. George knelt beside it and opened its doors. George turned pale the moment the little doors opened. He gulped and couldn't believe what he was looking at. This was the worst-case scenario. He was looking at a bomb counting down until its explosion, and they only had 45 minutes left before it would. They had to act fast. George's intense training for the job paid off as he immediately knew what to do. He called the bomb squad and explained the situation quickly. When that was fixed, he had a moment to breathe and realized they were lucky. The building was already empty in case the bomb squad didn't make it, but at that moment, he realized the building wasn't completely empty yet. The family was still right behind him. With an active bomb, getting them to safety was his first priority. He escorted them out of the building and waited anxiously for the bomb squad to arrive so he could instruct them. When they finally arrived, they had less than 20 minutes to go inside and disarm the explosives. George explained where they could find it and waited outside. He anxiously watched his watch and tracked the time. He gestured for people to get away from the building, as it could go off any moment. And then, none of the guards had seen anything, and the panic only made it easier for culprit to get away. Maybe the footage caught him, but the bomb squad leader exited the building with a smile. "The explosives are disarmed and safely contained," the man said. A wave of relief fell over the people gathered in front of the building. But George didn't share that feeling. He was focused on finding the person responsible for this mess. A colleague of George walks toward him and says they scoured the video footage, but nothing suspicious was seen. But as he spoke to his colleagues, he soon realized that none of them had seen anything, and the panic had only made it easier for the culprit to escape. He scoured the video footage, but nothing suspicious could be seen. He got away, a colleague sighed, but George refused to believe that. He rewatched all the security footage again and again, becoming more frustrated each time. The guard was worried that if they didn't catch the culprit, something like this would happen again in the near future. There had to be something they could use, and that's when the parents shared something. They had been looking for George for a while, and they had vital information to share. "We've seen the culprit, so we know what he looks like. Maybe we can help," the father said hopefully. The guard had completely forgotten about this fact, and he hurriedly showed them the footage. He turned the screen toward them and played the footage. The parents stared at the screen while George anxiously waited. He couldn't look at it anymore, as he didn't have a clue what to look for. It remained awfully quiet, and the guard was about to lose hope when they suddenly spoke up. "That's him, I'm sure," the mother suddenly exclaimed as she pointed at a vague figure on the screen. George looked at it and became incredibly frustrated. This wasn't a recognizable image. If they wanted to find the person responsible, they had to get a useful image. But there was still hope. Now that they had found the person responsible on the footage, George could look at the entire video again and see the person appeared more recognizable elsewhere. Moments later, he got the exact right frame. The guard took a picture and immediately went to the police, followed by the family. When they arrived at the police station, George told them exactly what had happened and was happy that the family had followed him. The parents told them their perspective, and the police could immediately start a case. With the story and the picture, they had a lot to go on. When the family was done giving their statement, they felt the situation was under control. They thanked George from the bottom of their hearts for all his hard work and that he had returned their son to them. George thanked them for their incredible plan and said goodbye later that week. A few days later, George was reading the newspaper before going to work, and he read something that immediately made his day. "Government building bomber caught" stood in big letters on the front page. He had never read an article that fast in his life, and a wide smile appeared on his face. The article detailed that the police had found the culprit thanks to camera footage of the building. The culprit was a known government hater and wanted to strike them at their core. Luckily, His plan was thwarted by anonymous heroes who notified the guards. George chuckled as he knew exactly who those heroes were.